what if Cell was born after Dragon Ball Super? This is a question that I've actually wondered ever since Dragon Ball Super first came into being, and not just that, but also really since the Buu saga of Dragon Ball Z, because of the fact that so many more powerful, interesting characters were introduced over the course of the story at that point in time. Think of all the incredible abilities. Think of all the incredibly powerful characters that we have met in the decades since the perfect villain, my favorite villain, Cell, of the titular Cell saga, Cell arc, was introduced into the story. So, I'm Mike Warren, and I'm going to be taking a look at that in depth in this video, discussing scientifically, not just through fan fiction like a lot of what other Dragon Ball what ifs that are out there, exactly how this would make sense and how it would work, including getting into some other timelines. So let's actually take a look first at, well, a little bit of an explanation as to some of this, because you see, in the Cell saga, we were shown in the manga what Cell was comprised of, who Cells. As a matter of fact, I've done dedicated videos. I've done over 1,000 videos, 1,200 plus on this channel, guys, hundreds of which you can get access to if you became a member. Literally just $1 a month, and you get access to hundreds of videos, live streams, and that much more. But as you can see right here, Cell, when he's discussing the abilities that he can use with Krillin, says that he can use moves such as the Kamehameha, the Spear Bomb, potentially. I did a whole member video about that, and that much more. And the reason for this is because of the fact that he was comprised of a number of different cells, thus his name. Genetic engineering is Dr. Gero's middle name. Maki is his first in the Spanish dub, in which most of them were gathered during the Saiyan saga, the invasion of Vegeta and Nappa. That's, of course, where he was able to learn Vegeta's technique, which Goku even uses and fails too when he's fighting against Perfect Cell. Now, as we can see right here, he got the cells of Piccolo, Goku, Gohan, Vegeta, and also Frieza and his father when they showed up. That's because the Spybot was operating under the autonomous control of the computer Dr. Gero had set up and put into place, Dr. Gero. Remember that, guys. Gero in the Japanese. You know, I'm always doing shout outs and alternating the names for the audience of all the different varieties. And so that's why Gero didn't know about Namek or know about the characters and how powerful they were here, like Frieza and King Cold. Otherwise, his plans would have probably altered significantly. But the computer did, and Cell got that information. However, when he's explaining in depth exactly where he came from, one big thing that a lot of people seem to overlook or not quite grasp is just how far in the future Cell actually came from and how far the future Trunks timeline and the events there, as well as the original timeline where Cell is from, I'll get into some of that because people always tend to be confused because it is time travel after all, really transpires. Cell explains who he is to Piccolo when Piccolo is feigning that he is unable to fight because of, you know, his arm being drained. For some reason, Cell forgot he could regenerate. So he says that he won't be born until about, as you can see, 24 years in the future. Now, it depends on the translation sometimes. It could also be, you know, that from when Cell had, you know, initially gone back in time, so on and so forth. The point is that he won't be born for decades in the future. Now, when did Trunks go back in time? So, as we know, Trunks, when he first met Son Goku, Torankusu Mirai, explained that he came from roughly 20 years in the future. Now let's do some simple math here, guys, because when we do that, you start to see exactly where in the main timeline, where the main story takes place, this would have occurred. 3 years for the time skip, leading up until the androids arrive. 7 years after that is the Buu saga, and 10 years later is when? Well, exactly when Goku went and met Oob, the reincarnation of Kid Buu that you could see right here. 20 years in the future, when Trunks went back in time initially, is exactly right here when Oob meets with Goku. So that means that Cell would have been born after all of this if he had survived in the main timeline, this timeline that we follow in the main storyline, and thus would have been born after not just the Buu Saga guys, because a lot of people completely forget this extremely important element too of the modern Dragon Ball, but also after Dragon Ball Super. And even Dragon Ball Daima, if you want to include that in the same continuity, which has a lot of issues if you want to, like, new forms that Goku gets and contradictions to the lore and a lot of other things that people like to pretend doesn't exist, but it definitely does. And so, when does Dragon Ball Super take place? I did a whole video about that too, guys, where Oob is on the thumbnail, and because he's on the thumbnail, nobody clicked because that's what happens on this channel. And so, right here. This is the end of the Buu Saga, where everybody's like all rejoicing, oh, Kid Buu is dead. Now good Buu is fine, blah, 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 blah. 10 years passed. Literally between these two pages of the manga that Toriyama drew in 1995, that is when Dragon Ball Super takes place. It was not supposed to. Nobody ever intended for that to exist. It was supposed to just be like peaceful and everybody's chilling and stuff like that. But anyway, let's ignore that because Gohan has glasses and a book by Charles Darwin and stuff. So clearly he's a scholar now. Let's just pretend, So none of the Dragon Ball Super happened. But anyway, it did in this continuity of Super, and Daima happened before it. And thus, as a result, all that stuff would have happened. Think about if Dr. Gero and his computer that took over after him had the cells of not only everyone it mentions right here in the manga, another thing that they don't really get to include in the anime. Maybe if they ever redo it for a different studio like Madhouse or Bones, that'd be awesome to see them include that. But if he also had the cells of everyone introduced after Cell, not just Majin Buu, much like Android 20, the character in Xenoverse and some of the other content, not all of which is made by Toei and Shueisha on the internet especially, but also in terms of characters like, for instance, Beerus, the god of destruction, Bills, as they used to call him, and I think they still do actually in the Spanish. Shout out to Mr. Big Baron for making this art for me. And basically, he would potentially have the cells of Beerus, a god of destruction, whatever race of being he is, some kind of alien cat, same with Champa. And then, as a result, he would have the Nekomajin genes. Maybe Nekomajin was actually Beerus's nephew or something like that, or his son, kind of like Kuriza for Frieza in Toriyama spoof. So imagine if he had that, if he had the power and or techniques of a god of destruction, a Hakai Shin. But we can go even further than that. We can go even further beyond. And so what else would there be? Well, there would be other characters who showed up on Earth, especially in the quote-unquote filler, even though Super doesn't really have it, like Hit. Imagine if he had the abilities of characters like Hit to stop time, to live even longer than he normally would, because Hit is over 1,000 years old and certainly doesn't look it, I guess. I mean, I don't think we've ever seen another one of his species, so maybe he does. But either way, maybe they're like Saiyans in the new continuity where they live for, 999 years and they look like children, and then boom, they sprout up like weeds, which Gohan said in the superhero movie, despite the fact that, Gohan was a character we literally saw age on screen, but let's pretend that doesn't exist. Now, speaking of superhero, he could even have the genes, the cells of Cell Max, which I do want to make sure everybody's aware. Cell Max is not actually Cell. He is a garbage ripoff of Cell that screams and does nothing really else other than that. He doesn't regenerate for some reason. He just has a weakness in his head, and he's just like a far inferior version of the real perfect villain, even though he does kind of look cool with the red. But either way, not quite Cell. He's just, let's just pretend he doesn't exist, even though I do enjoy the movie. But he would have the genes and cells of Gohan Beast potentially too. Same thing with Jiren. If he went to, let's say, the Tournament of Power, let's say that one of those bugs attached themselves to somebody going to the Tournament of Power. Well, That would just be a smorgasbord right there. 80 fighters from the different universes, all with special different abilities. Not just that, but the gods that are all there, and even the angels. I mean, remember what we saw with Moro in the Moro arc when Goku was fighting against him. Goku has Master Ultra Instinct, and then Moro is able to get the power, because Moro is also a ripoff of Cell, so this should theoretically apply here, right? He was able to get the power of an angel, Merusu, and guess what? He gets Master Ultra Instinct too, and so maybe we'd have a Cell that kind of looks a little bit like, well, this right here, the thumbnail for the video, which hopefully, people actually click on. If not, maybe I'll talk about this video in the future, or maybe not. But the point is that we have to now get into how this would actually occur, because obviously we would be able to have a far more powerful, far more significantly capable version of Cell if he actually came to exist. But could he even do that? Dramatic music, which I'm not going to edit in. Well, it is entirely possible because, as I talked about in this video years ago, there is a Cell who should theoretically still exist somewhere in the timelines of Dragon Ball Z and Super. Now, there is a lot of confusion as to how many timelines there actually are. In Dragon Ball Z, I did a video explaining how many timelines there are, how much time travel really works and does not work theoretically, but how it works and mechanics and everything like that in the past. And there was one short I did where I had so much pushback because I explained that there are 4 timelines in Dragon Ball Z, one of which is called the unseen timeline. A lot of people are like, you just made up a timeline. A timeline doesn't exist. No, you're wrong. You don't understand time travel as well as I do. Hate to pull rank on you, but it's true. And it's simple to explain it. Because let's go right to the manga where Toriyama showed us exactly why it exists. And this is something that I didn't invent. It's been around for a very long time in this fandom. Everyone has known about this for many years, aside from the people who don't do any research and still think because of Dunning-Kruger effect they know what they're talking about. So basically, when does the unseen timeline happen? Simple. Right here. We see that Trunks in the original timeline used time travel to go back in time and use his heart virus medication that was given to him by Bulma. No, Bulma didn't invent it. We're never told she did because there was a pandemic on the planet. And guess what happened? He saved Goku. Then 3 years pass, he goes back again exactly like what happened in the timeline that we follow in the story, except there's no Cell there yet. And so, as a result, what happens? Somehow they're able to defeat the androids in this timeline, the first branching reality from the original timeline that is like a duplicate, although really our main timeline is a duplicate of it, of the main timeline. And thus, what happens? Somehow Trunks is able to then in turn go to the future, his original timeline where he came from, which is in reality the present. As Cell says right here, Trunks was able to somehow kill the androids in the timeline that he came from, the real original timeline. He's the only real powered survivor and the legacy of the true Z fighters, the true Goku and friends that existed in the first timeline that all died and got wiped out. Trunks somehow managed to kill them. How? We don't know because it's never truly shown to us because the whole timeline is not seen by us, thus unseen. However, what happened? Cell, after Trunks had found a way to kill them, I did a whole video about this, by the way, on my channel, which is how did the original Trunks defeat the androids in his timeline. He might have used the time chamber and then got caught off guard by Cell, which I did a video about that too. He might have used the remote shutdown device, which is speculated in the anime, and also by, Shueisha when they released their own timeline layout. But either way, Trunks was going to travel back in time again to let the Z fighters know, as Piccolo points out right here, that he had defeated the androids and had succeeded. Now, this is where a big point of contention comes from, because there's a lot of people who think that Trunks never actually time traveled in the original timeline, and that this is all just something that's fabricated by fans. Again, Wrong, he did, because it plays out exactly the same way as this scene right here. That's how Trunks knew to lie in waiting for Cell. Trunks returned to his timeline like the original one did. He killed the androids, possibly the exact same way, with training in the time chamber and blowing them up or using the remote shutdown device. And then in the original timeline, he did not know Cell was coming, so when he went back in time again to warn everyone, he gets jumped and killed by Cell. Because obviously, even if Cell is weaker than that version of Trunks, he would have no idea who this random lizard bug man is who just showed up and kills him. You know, he's in the anime version, we see him rush to fight him with his sword in his base. Naturally, a base Saiyan isn't going to be able to fight against somebody as strong as the androids at this point in time, or maybe in the entire franchise up until when they get God Ki, which we see Trunks, even after the time chamber twice, still goes Super Saiyan to fight and kill Cell. So he purposely waits because he knows that this is going to play out again, and then he kills him here. So anyone who says that there is no unseen timeline, there is no fourth timeline, there's only three, and that Trunks, never went back in time in the original timeline, they don't know what they're talking about. They can't read between the lines. They can't read between the lines, guys. And as a result, that's why we get the confusion and people, randomly harassing and threatening me on the internet because they think that I'm spreading misinformation, which is like, no, you're just wrong. So felt like throwing that in this video too, because I wasn't going to do a separate one about that, but it definitely factors in because that means that there is almost certainly another Cell still alive in the unseen timeline because nobody knew Cell existed in that timeline. There is only a very tiny possibility that they killed him and found out because, as we know, what happened. In the main timeline, the one that we follow in the main storyline, if you guys are keeping up, what happens? They go to the secret underground bunker where Dr. Gero lived, and was working on Cell. Here's his computer. Here's Cell in the incubation chamber. And they went there in order to get the blueprints to use them to build another remote shutdown device and thus use that to try and shut down the androids. Of course, Krillin is the one who fails to do that because he didn't want to shut down and just blow up Android 18. He didn't want to just murder her because he saw the humanity in her. Like in my last public video, you guys could see, possibly, depending upon if I'm dating myself right now in this video, how Android 18 Krillin fell in love, or whatever the title is for that, whatever YouTube didn't promote. And so the fact is that this is possibly something that happened in the unseen timeline as well. That being said, in this version, they knew about Cell, and then as a result, they decide to blow it up. Now, Krillin or Trunks kills this version of Cell too. I like to say that Krillin did it because it kind of gives him a main villain victory of his own, ending up killing a main villain. He almost did that with Vegeta too, so Krillin's very underrated by fans, although maybe you can argue that this right here is the computer. You can't see my mouse for whatever reason, but like the wires that Krillin's blasting toward. Hard to say. In the anime, it looks like both them killed him. We don't really know. But either way, the fact of the matter is that they blew up the area where Cell was in this version, and so many people would say, well, they would have probably did that in the original timeline or the unseen one. Even I'm getting mixed up here, but no. The thing is that the only reason they even went there is because of the fact that Cell told Piccolo that they had a secret underground bunker. Trunks had no idea that this existed. He didn't find it in his original timeline that he came from, in his History of Trunks timeline, which is a duplicate of that one. And thus, they only found it here when they specifically went looking for it. Maybe you can argue that Trunks did a lot of research and R&D or whatever and just looked around for a while in the unseen timeline and found it too. That would help to give him his own way of destroying the androids with the shutdown device if that's what really happened. But even then, there's an argument to be made that he wouldn't blow up the laboratory like he did here because he doesn't really know about Cell. And not just that, but maybe he would keep it around just in case, because if there's other androids that just so happen to appear like they keep doing, what would happen? They'd be able to find other ways of wiping them out. Hard to say. It's possible he never even found this, just used the time chamber. So if this Cell is still alive, then if events play out very similarly to how they did in the main timeline, you can argue that this Cell would be born after some alternate history in which events like Dragon Ball Super plays out, thus giving us a Cell that is still alive within the continuity of the storyline, and thus in turn could be just as powerful. Or let's just say, for whatever reason, they decide to spare him in the main timeline, or they had, for whatever reason, just, missed him. Whatever it is, if Cell was born in the main timeline after everything in Dragon Ball Super transpired, as, if you want to count Daimatu, you could throw that in there, throw in some magic, demon power, Super Saiyan 4, whatever. Maybe he'd be a lot hairier in this version. He'd be vastly more powerful than you could ever imagine. As a matter of fact, he would probably have, because I'm recording this on May the 4th, unlimited power. I can't do that anywhere near as good as Ian McDermott. I'm not going to try. And not just that, but if he decided to absorb the androids like he did in the main timeline because of his programming, then he'd be far more powerful as Perfect Cell because the fact that Android 17, 18 are vastly more powerful than they were in Dragon Ball Z, especially when he absorbed them, where by the time of the Tournament of Power, Android 17 is stronger than initial Super Saiyan Blue Kaioken times 20 Goku, based upon all the feats that we see throughout that tournament, which goes to show you that maybe if Cell tried to punch some poachers for a few years, that he would have been stronger than, I don't know, the Grand Priest. Imagine if he had his cells too. And thus, maybe we get Ultra Instinct Duracell, Chadhan, Beast, 4, Ego, Instinct, Perfection. And he'd be even more perfecter than ever. No wonder he's the best villain. By the way, guys, that was me discussing what I think would happen if Cell was born after Dragon Ball Super, which is something that I've always wanted to do a video on, so I figured why not throw it in there. And, well, with that being said, it's hard to make Cell even more perfect than he ever was in the first place, and they really tried with Superhero, and they failed, unfortunately, by making him just a screaming kaiju monster, which is never really a good villain to fight in Dragon Ball in general. They never really work. So, I guess let me know what you think down below in the comments, and I'll see you later in the future.